Hi, I'm Sam Solomon, the host of Signal Tower, the show where we talk to entrepreneurs about startup design and education. Today I am joined by Aswin Natarajan. He is an associate at TechStars, one of the world's leading startup accelerators. He's also the co-founder of Startup Exchange and incubator at Georgia Tech. Aswin, welcome to the show.
Pleasure.
So, I guess before we get started today, you did an interview with Gary Vaynerchuk. What did you guys talk about, and what does it take for someone to get an interview with him?
So what I talked to Gary Vaynerchuk about was really about understanding what he thought about native advertising. That was because I interviewed him so that I could get some content and get some information for one of the companies here at TechStars. It was a really fun interview. We talked a lot about the future of content. We talked about how B2B companies specifically can do content, because we always hear about B2C companies that are doing crazy promotional things to get their customers to pay attention. But we never really talk about how B2B companies can do content properly. And so we discussed that, and then finally we kind of touched off on about how how these B2B companies are going to really come to dominate and become perhaps even the trade publications of their industry in the coming years if they stick with content. And as far as how I actually got to meet him, or actually how I got to chat with him, I think I just got really lucky. What happened was I was on Twitter, and I noticed that he had a little link mentioning that he had a version 2 of his website just come up. And so I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I went on his website and I checked it out, and there I found an article per day for every single day of the year. And I was like, this is incredible. And so I was searching for the exact location of where I could sign up for this, but I wasn't able to find it on his website. And so I went to Google, and I spent about 15 minutes just Googling Gary Vaynerchuk interviews, and then I stumbled upon this website called liveninja.com, which allows you to interview influential people for free. And I found that sign up over there. I signed up. He had an assistant get back to me, and at that point she was like, well, what are you going to be talking about? And I was like, I write the TechStars associate blog, and I'd love to have you on my blog. And that's kind of how I worked my way in.
That's awesome. I think Twitter is fantastic in the fact that you can kind of reach out with people that I guess before a communication tool like that would never exist. It's amazing. Like authors that I like.
Yeah.
Of course, Gary Vaynerchuk's pretty far up there, so that a little luck never hurts.
I mean, I might just be lucky because I happen to have the TechStars name behind me. And
yeah, you had a little bit of clout with that.
Yeah.
So let's take a second and let's talk about TechStars for a little bit. For those watching that don't know, what exactly is TechStars?
So TechStars is a mentorship-driven startup accelerator that basically takes in about 10 to 12 companies every single year, puts them through an intense program where they get a ton of mentorship advice, a ton of feedback, and towards the end, they're also invested in by TechStars, and towards the end, they have a demo day where a lot of investors from around the country are brought in and given the opportunity to invest into these companies. So it's basically being able to condense 2 to 3 years worth of startup experience within 2 to 3 months.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
And what's your role specifically at TechStars?
So I'm an associate at TechStars, and as an associate, what I do is I basically help the program manager run the program. But I also have this incredible opportunity because I get to work with 3 different companies here at TechStars, and I'm able to help them in any capacity that I can or that they request. So I come from a marketing background, and so that's where a lot of my efforts go for these people.
Cool.
Yep.
For me, I look at the 3 kind of leading edge accelerators, Y Combinator, TechStars, and 500 startups. But what do you think differentiates TechStars from YC and 500 startups?
So YC and 500 and all the other startup accelerators out there, they're really great, but I think the one thing that truly differentiates TechStars is the mentorship network. It's really extensive, and also the fact is, I believe that TechStars actually just puts an emphasis on really great mentorship to these companies. So, for example, Y Combinator, I think, does have an aspect of mentorship, but it's not really so emphasized. They're also, the class sizes are larger,
Right.
and at TechStars, the class sizes are smaller, they're more intimate, and there's a huge emphasis on utilizing this network. It's kind of like once you are in TechStars, you have the ability to always tap into this network of people.
Yeah, and if you're a startup, having a great network of people, veterans that have done it before, and just people that know the market, I think is pretty invaluable. So
Yeah.
that's good. Let's take a moment and let's talk about education for entrepreneurs, because that's like one of my favorite subjects on the planet. What do you think about people that are, some people just drop out of college to start a business? What do you think about that?
Well, to be honest, I actually wanted to drop out of college myself at one point in time. But I don't know if I would necessarily recommend either dropping out of college or staying in college. But I think the question is really more about what kind of an education does an entrepreneur need. And I really believe that at the end of the day, like, you can be in college, still get an incredible education from all the different classes and all the people you meet and all the perspectives that you get just by virtue of being in college, and still be a great entrepreneur. And alternately, there are a lot of people who just go out there and they start their own businesses because they are very lucid about what has to be built and what has to be done, and who it has to be sold to. And I think they're just as successful too.
Right.
So really, I think at the end of the day, it's just that to be an entrepreneur, you need to be an entrepreneur. And whether you decide to do that after you graduate from college, or whether you decide to do that while you're in college, or if you've dropped out of college and you decide to do that, that's great. But it's kind of an education which you cannot get a degree for. You just have to do it.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair. Now, you're at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. I had a conversation about hiring in Atlanta with John Birdsong a couple weeks ago. And I said that I thought it was odd how hard it was to find developers and designers in Atlanta. Georgia Tech is one of the top computer science schools in the country, and this is what he said. He said the entrepreneurial culture doesn't run in their veins. I've worked for 2 years on Georgia Tech's campus and have been exposed to thousands of students. He then said that he just didn't think that tech students were willing to take a leap of faith like their counterparts at MIT and Stanford. What's your response to that? Are you seeing something similar? Are you seeing some sort of momentum at Georgia Tech?
Well, at the moment, I think he's correct. I think that he is correct about the fact that currently Georgia Tech students don't have an entrepreneurial blood, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Georgia Tech students don't have the raw talent or the raw ability or even the raw mindset that it requires. So, for example, what makes great entrepreneurs? I would say that intelligence makes great entrepreneurs, gumption, right? An ability to corral good people around your idea. Those things actually do exist at Georgia Tech. There are plenty of people that I've met, a lot of great students who have good ideas and who have all those necessary qualities. But I think what's truly missing is an aspirational quality, right? So you aspire to be the highest thing that you see in a certain vein. And so, for example, if the most entrepreneurial students at Georgia Tech only see consulting as the place where they can get the most leverage, then they're going to aspire to that, right? If the designers see that they can only go to Apple and that's where they can create great design, then they're going to aspire to that. But if you are able to get students, and this is the difference between students at Stanford and MIT and the students at Georgia Tech, is that those students are able to see that the best in their classes are actually going to these startups and designing for startups. They're actually programming for startups. They're doing biz dev work for startups and marketing work for startups. They don't have to go to an agency. They don't have to go to a consulting firm. They don't have to necessarily go to a Fortune 500 to be successful, or to even have like a fulfilling job. And so I think the biggest thing is if you can manage aspirations and create the right incentives with regards to aspirations, then you can create entrepreneurial culture at Georgia Tech.
That's great, but I think like going deeper, what actionable steps do you have to make to build an entrepreneurial culture on a college campus?
Well, this is really interesting because so Brad Feld, he's a VC at the Foundry Group, and the Foundry Group is a very well-known venture capital firm,
Right.
and they're pretty much right across TechStars. And he has an interesting hypothesis and he calls this the Boulder thesis, where the founders and the entrepreneurs of this community made the university entrepreneurial. It wasn't the university that outputted entrepreneurs.
Right.
And this is already happening in Atlanta. So we're seeing Hippopotamus, we're seeing the Atlanta Tech Village, we're seeing a whole bunch of different little nodes of entrepreneurial awesomeness that are happening, and all that needs to happen is that they need to come into the university, they need to come into our campus, and they need to be able to interact with these students so that you can actually go ahead and change this culture. In fact, I actually heard a very interesting idea the other day. I was talking with a friend of mine here in Boulder, and he was talking about how the University of Michigan, which is actually now one of the most entrepreneurial campuses in the United States,
Wow.
when they started, they actually had zero entrepreneurial culture. They were just like Georgia Tech, or they were just like any other university anywhere. And what they did was they literally bussed people. They took people, they took a bus, they crammed people into it, and they shipped them out to all the different hackathons all over the nation so that they could bring the entrepreneurial culture back. So they literally imported entrepreneurial culture.
That's
by
awesome.
bussing people out and bringing them back.
That's awesome. When I was in Chicago at the Starter League, we what school was it? It was oh my gosh, it wasn't U Chicago. There was one of the schools up there. We went and hopped on, and Facebook had a bunch of like sponsored hackathons, and we went to a Facebook one, and then we went to there's a few others. I mean, that's a lot of fun. It's really interesting there because at those types of things, there's just people there, and they just want to make things. And that's I think that's obviously a really key part of I think being an entrepreneur. You just have to want to make things. But I do feel like at Georgia Tech there is kind of a maker culture there, right? It's just there's a few elements that are missing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So at Georgia Tech we have a very big makerspace called the Invention Studio, and we have a campus full of engineers, and I've heard all sorts of tall tales about the crazy things that people make in their dorms. And that exists, but what doesn't exist is the fact that people can actually go ahead and make businesses out of this. And that might be a thing that's, I don't believe that's truly cultural. I just believe that it's a fact of, again, aspiration, where people have to see the fact that you can also make things, and you can
Right.
also things that you make.
Right, absolutely. All right, well, so let's say if we're going to design, you and I right here need to design a curriculum for entrepreneurs, something that what if we were going to design a curriculum, what would that look like?
Okay, sure. So the first thing is, I think that every entrepreneur, regardless of whether they want to be in biz dev or regardless of whether they want to be developers, they need to have a certain skill set of doing certain things. So for example, let's take the biz dev people. If you're a biz dev person, I think at minimum, you need to be able to do all the functions of marketing. So you need to be able to set up your own, so this is the person who founds the initial idea, who incepts everything. And so I think that if nothing else, you need to be able to write really well. right?
Yes.
You need to be able to have some basic Photoshop skills so that you can design things and at least put your idea and take it out of your head and put it onto paper, right? Um, if you're a developer, you're learning Java in school, which is great, but you probably should learn Ruby. You should probably learn JavaScript. You should probably learn some front end as well, right? If you're a designer, go beyond Photoshop, right? I mean, maybe you should also learn some Illustrator. Maybe you should also, and, in fact, there's nothing wrong with Photoshop, but maybe put Photoshop into a good use, right? That's that's more about UX, right? And really hone in on those skills. So I feel that from a very tangible perspective, there are certain skills that everyone needs to learn. From another perspective altogether is just people need to understand what it takes to actually build a business. I feel like it's really strange, but people always shoot for the lowest thing that they can get. Why would you shoot for anything achievable? You should be aiming within a year to have 10,000 people. Like,
Right.
is that ridiculous? Sure, whatever. But you should be there. You should be the person who's aspiring to do that. Because if you're just trying to say, oh, I just want to get all of Georgia Tech and that's going to be my startup idea, then that's not truly aiming to make a business. Then you're kind of a hobbyist. And I think that's a distinction.
And that kind of goes back to what are your aspirations? Like, if you don't, if you I guess if you're not aspiring to try and do great things, will you? Who knows? But if you don't have that drive, then it makes it tough. Startups are tough. They're a grind. And what about failing? What happens if you fail? Should failure play in entrepreneurs learning?
I think failure is awesome. Like after coming to TechStars, so I've always read about people should fail, learn to fail, fail fast, whatever, right? But after coming to TechStars and you talk to these companies and you realize, wow, 50-50 of them, like if you talk to like all of them, there's a 50-50 chance of failure because they've all failed at something before.
Yeah.
And that's incredible because you realize that they failed, but you talk to them and you're still so impressed by how intelligent they are and how much they know and how confident they are in their next venture. I think it requires you have to be comfortable with change, and failure is part of that. And I don't think that anything substantial has really been created without an understanding that you're probably not going to get it right the first time.
Right. Right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Startup Exchange now. Well, actually, yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what Startup Exchange is and what you guys are trying to do?
Okay, sure. So in the fall of 2012, we had started with a program called the Startup Semester, which was an accelerator program. At the end of that semester, we had basically pitched to the librarians and to the administrative staff at Georgia Tech, and we told them, hey, listen, we think that what we're doing with Startup Semester could be 20 times better if we had a dedicated workspace where people could come in and meet up, and we could kind of centralize all the entrepreneurial activity that's happening at Georgia Tech. And so they gave us a dinky little room on the first floor of the Georgia Tech Library, and we founded that as the Startup Exchange. And so in that first year, what we did was we were basically like a hippopotamus of Georgia Tech, where we brought in people. We would have weekly meetings ourselves, and we would host events. And basically, we're trying to put all our energy into one space, so that space becomes the place where if a freshman or a sophomore decides they want to be an entrepreneur, if they're interested in this entrepreneurship thing, they know where to go and they know who to talk to.
And how do you go about getting the word out? How do you attract people?
So a lot of it is mouth, like person to person, and it's by word of mouth. But we also have a really active Facebook page. So right now, I think we're all about 300 people, and we post very regularly. And we also collaborate with other organizations and try to bring them and try to do like dual events. And through that, we're trying to bring people in.
That's a fantastic idea. Well, I guess what else can be done to encourage a culture of entrepreneurship at Georgia Tech? We've kind of talked about, there's makers there, the talent's definitely there, but how do you encourage that culture of entrepreneurship?
So I think the biggest thing is we have to keep aiming really high. So the first year that we started startup semester was a very big leap for Georgia Tech. Then we opened the startup team, which was also a big leap for Georgia Tech, right? And we have to keep aspiring higher. We have to be able to send people out to Michigan. We have to be able to send people out to the Penn Apps Hackathon and to Stanford and to actually talk to VCs and so on and so forth, because those things matter, right? And those things also take money and time and vision, right? And so that has to be done. We have to be able to work with alumni who are interested in entrepreneurship and give them free workspace, because why not, right? Especially young alumni. And they should be, this type of workspace, free workspace exists at CU Boulder. It exists, I'm sure, at Stanford and at MIT and other places. I know for a fact it existed at Singapore, where I studied abroad. And I think that, things like that, they really matter, and they will help alumni and students kind of progress forward. I also think it would be cool if we should be doing a ton of hackathons. We should be able to bring in programs that teach Rails and programs that teach, front-end dev and UX design, and offer them to students, because yes, Georgia Tech offers Lynda, but it's not enough to just force everyone to teach themselves, because not everyone learns that way. So.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things. Neil Sales Griffin, who is one of the founders of the Starter League, his whole thing was this is actually what he said. The reason he started the Starter League was because the way colleges teach computer science sucks. It's you can't. There are people that don't really care about how the circuitry works. They just want to be able to go out and build stuff. But if they know they can go out and build stuff, then they'll be hooked. And then they can learn the intricacies later. And that's not how a lot of colleges are teaching computer science. I think
colleges are teaching computer scientists are teaching computer science the way that you would teach a computer scientist. Right. You're not teaching them to be someone who can go out there and functionally build a website. In fact, I don't even think most of the people who study computer science know necessarily how to build a website. And that's sad. But you're teaching scientists. You're not teaching people who are functional, who are able to get out there and do stuff.
Right. I mean, that was my experience. And it was interesting listening to Neil tell that story, because that was the exact same experience. I took, computer science for a while in college. Introduction to object-oriented programming. We were doing Java, and we're building these really long applications that I didn't feel like I could do anything with. I just wanted to be able to put something together and put it on the internet. And 3 weeks into the Starter League, we had been taught enough about APIs to be able to, pull information from Facebook, to put together a really basic application that just has a list of 2 items and they match the 2 items, really incredibly basic things. And I feel like that spark when people can, go out and they actually see that something they themselves built is doing this thing that, it works the way they thought it would. That's, to me, that's an amazing thing. And
and it's funny because they actually teach you this in elementary school, right, where science and everything is fun. It's oh, look, the volcano did what I thought it would do, right? But what happens, I don't understand what happens during college, where the intent of why you're learning something is completely lost. And you're learning for the sake of getting a degree. You're not necessarily learning for the sake of getting a skill that you can use to do something. And I think that's college education.
And that's actually something I've written a good bit about. And I think one of the problems with college itself is it's all a game. It's a game, and if you get the high score, you get an A. You get a 90, you get a 99 on your test, or you get 100 on your test, you've got the high score. And you're not actually learning, basically, trying to game things for this test, trying to cram as much in your head to get an A on the test, basically, is a game, and it negates any kind of learning in the process, which was also one thing that I thought was great at the starter league, we had classes. They were long classes. They were incredibly long. They were like 3 hours twice a week. Like that's a pretty long class.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is you go home and you kind of work on it and you want to work on it, and nobody's going to test you to see if you know how routes work. That's like if you don't know how the application routes, then you can't get to the next step where you can actually start to understand how what you built works. And I just think I think that's
a good point. So what you're talking about here is continuity, right? In education, I've noticed that too. So I studied biomedical engineering at Georgia Tech, and I thought it was really funny because in one year I would learn about prosthetics, and the next year I would learn about MRI machines, and the next year we would learn about dialysis machines, and like there's no continuity because those are three very significantly different types of engineering, all clustered under one degree name, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you're mentioning is really profound.
Yeah, I think in the end, I went to the starter league trying to, I wanted to become a better programmer. I wanted to try and understand. I knew kind of how front end worked and really wanted to kind of learn, Rails. But also part of it was to see, it is a for-profit, it's a company, it's a startup. If for-profit education is a really kind of terrible, I don't know if stigma is the right word attached to it. I wanted to see that if a company that profited could actually, do better than, basically the state schools. Like I went to Auburn, I wanted to see if it could do better than that. And it's amazing. It's exponentially cheaper, and I really felt like I learned like an unbelievable amount in, 10 weeks. And that's a pretty amazing thing. But I guess, do you have any other kind of thoughts? We'll go on to a few kind of personal questions, but we'll kind of like while we're talking about education, anything else?
I guess my biggest concern right now, not even concern, it's like, again, it's an aspiration. My biggest aspiration right now for Georgia Tech is there's a lot of momentum that's happening right now. And this is very strong momentum. We're seeing this because people from Georgia Tech are actually going into the Atlanta Tech Village. They're actually going into Hippopotamus. I know personally there are some students who go and talk to the CEO of MailChimp, and they're networking now. And they're starting to learn. They're starting to really, to take on their own ideas and really become something of themselves. And I hope that can continue. For that to continue, we need the community to keep supporting these people. We need the community to keep investing into Georgia Tech and actually not give up very quickly, because it's a slow burn. But if you do go talk to the freshmen, if you do go help people who are trying to make an idea, even if it's a terrible idea, if you're able to kind of help them shape their vision or kind of learn something along the way, then that's really valuable. Another big thing is hire the Georgia Tech and Emory and Georgia State and all the Atlanta interns, because that'll help, right? It's because of SalesLoft that I was able to come here to TechStars and actually do a decent job. And those little openings that you make for students are going to be, are really going to flourish someday in the future if you keep it up. So
absolutely. All right. So do you have a mentor or someone that you look up to?
Well, yeah, I have to say that I really appreciated Kyle Porter of SalesLoft for hiring me when I absolutely knew nothing, and I also appreciate that he's given me a ton of help since, with regards to even getting to TechStars and some of the work that I do here at TechStars. And so that kind of mentorship that starts really early was really valuable in my life, and I'm very grateful. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And yeah, it sounds like your job's pretty awesome. You get to hang out with startups all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. It's pretty awesome.
I guess what type of things interest you, kind of outside of startups and stuff? I know I've got probably an unhealthy obsession with startups as well, but like outside of that, what type of things are you interested in?
Well, ever since moving to Boulder, I've been climbing a mountain every week, which is great. It's fun. Like it's a lot of fun. I'm actually a really outdoorsy guy.
Yeah.
So I'm enjoying that. I love tea. Like I really love tea. Um, so I've been always like contemplating this idea of having an actual tea company or a company that makes tea and sells it to people. And other than that, like I think that I'm just really interested in learning different things, and I've always been kind of like a little scatterbrained, but also just curious to learn whatever I can. So I have a different passion like every 3 months. It's great.
Great.
Yeah.
What about favorite books?
So I'm reading a book right now called I think it's called Stick or Stickiness. And it's basically talking about what ideas are like, what makes ideas stick, like what makes tall tales stick, what makes urban legends stick, and why is it that some ideas do work and some ideas don't work.
Right.
I think it's an awesome book. And as far as like really big heavy reading, to be honest with you, I don't think I've had that opportunity too much to pick up a really good fiction book and just dive in.
Me personally, I understand that. Like all the books on my shelf are all like nonfiction. Like I'm pretty serious into kind of like design books, the elements of typography, things like that. So I understand. I don't really have a lot of interest to pick up a novel, so you don't have to feel guilty about that or anything.
But hey, actually, one book that I love that I think that a lot of people would also really appreciate is Tony Hsieh's Delivering Happiness. I think it's a great book. The reason why is just because this is the kind of book that you read and you're like, oh my God, like he actually struggled and it was hard, right? And there were a lot of ups and downs, and through it all, like he still came out with this desire to help do something that matters. And I think that reading a book like that is what people need to read to understand that these are the things that matter in life. Is doing something you can actually get passionate about. So
absolutely. All right, so I guess the last question, if you could give advice to someone that's starting out, trying to start a business or thinking about starting a business, what would that piece of advice be?
My first thing is, other than the one thing that all people say, which is go do it, is go find 5 to 6 people who you really trust, who can give you good advice, and then ask them to like just destroy your idea in any way possible, right? And after that, see if you're still excited about it, because that's what matters, right? If 10 people can tell you, I don't think that you're the right person to do this idea, you're not the first person to think of this idea, this idea probably can't make money, blah, 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 blah. I mean, take into consideration everything that they tell you, but also understand that if you're still like, screw those guys, I can still do this and I still want to do this, then I think that's something special, and that's probably an idea you should follow.
That's interesting. I like that. Do you have any last comments, or was there a question that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Can't remember at the moment, but
well, it sounds like we did a pretty good job then.
Yeah, I think this is a really fun interview. I really enjoyed it.
Well, good. Where can people follow you? How can they throw money at you? What,
Yeah. So throw money at me on the street, whatever. I will solicit your checks for free, and you can always follow me on Twitter at Hey Aswin, and I also have a blog called it's TechStarsAssociate.wordpress.com, and you can follow my blog there too.
All right, and I'll link it when I post the transcript. Aswin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate it.